Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another F1 Worldwide The Fan podcast, and joining me today is a new F1 YouTuber onto the scene, but a very kind of interesting guy. Really knowledgeable about F1. He produces some great videos, especially his graphics are I'm kind of jealous on that front. Everything looks a little bit slick. You may not recognise him today though, because he is not wearing a trademark cap that he usually does in a video. So Joe from the F1 Club, welcome mate. How are you?
Hello mate, thank you for having me on. Yeah, like I said, I was going to wear a Williams cap just for you, but I thought I've done my hair today. Well, you know, this is about as good as it gets when it comes to doing my hair. So I thought I'll show a bit of hair today.
Well, mate, you know, I've seen this. I feel privileged that you've made the effort to do your hair, and yeah, show it off. Why not? I know it was a revelation in your Louis Delatraz interview that people are like, you got hair?
It definitely caused a little bit of a shake-up. I think even Louis was shocked when he dialed into the call and he saw me without a hat, and I think even he was shocked to see that. So.
It's just become so trademark for you. But guys, if you haven't already, please do and go and check out Joe's YouTube channel and drop it a subscribe. I will leave links to that in the description below, and as we mentioned there, he recently did an interview with Louis Delatraz, which obviously was a great interview. Like I said, does kind of lots of F1 related topic contents. He's done a few kind of worst liveries. He's looked at kind of drivers in general on the channel. Like I said, driver interview as well with Louis Delatraz. Just lots of really great F1 content, and especially I think you helped out a few people with creating liveries for their own F1 cars, didn't you? You dropped a Photoshop on that, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I've done a couple of little bits, and you know, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Photoshop guru, but you know, if I've got something in the bag I can help someone with, then you know, why not? I'll do it.
Exactly, mate. Absolutely. But we aren't just here to talk about Joe, although we're very grateful for him to coming on. We're here, as always, on the F1 Worldwide podcast to talk about a specific topic. And today's topic, you've probably figured it out by the thumbnail already that you've clicked on, and that is we are going to be talking about who we think will be the next Formula One world champion after Lewis Hamilton. And there are a load of candidates on the grid. It's only really Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen. I mean, it is only those two guys who have world championships on the grid, and both look unlikely to add to their total, with obviously Sebastian Vettel might still win it in the 2020 season, we don't know. But it's a very interesting topic because there's that new generation coming in, and there's also some few curveballs in there that I'm sure me and Joe are going to talk about. So, Joe, who should we start off with this topic discussing who's going to be the next F1 or new F1 world champion?
I think, to be honest, I think we start with the obvious, don't we? I think that, you know, Lewis is obviously, in my opinion, Lewis is going to probably clinch this season, and then it's from next season or potentially even 22 that we start looking at who the next candidates are. Obviously, I thought that 22 was going to be the year that we saw a shake up, but with the regulations being pushed back, I think, you know, we're looking at potentially seeing an eight-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, and then, you know, a new era after that. But I think the obvious two to talk about first would be Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. I don't know if you agree, but I think they're probably the two most hotly tipped to probably win world titles next.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think not only because of the talent that they both possess, but also because, well, Max Verstappen for a while now has kind of had this team building around him, and very much so. 2019, he became the leader. He had his best season, in my opinion, with Red Bull, and everything is built around him, and he's really well suited to kind of mount a serious title challenge if all the other pieces come together, like the car and obviously the team strategy and everything, and teammates supporting as well within that. And Charles, obviously, Sebastian Vettel will leave at the end of the 2020 season. He had a very good first year at Ferrari. He keeps progressing year on year. 2020 will be a really big year, I think, to assert his dominance on the team with Sebastian leaving, and then 2021 would probably be his first serious title mount, but you never know what 2020 might hold. But yeah, they are the two obvious candidates for sure, mate.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about this as well is that, you know, we really got to see glimpses. Now Charles is in a better car. We really got to see glimpses of his future last year, and we sort of saw Max and Charles fighting on track quite a bit, and it made for very interesting racing. That made for very good watching, in my opinion, anyway. You know, there were times where they were both very close to, you know, the limit of what you can get away with. But that's exciting for me, because I really think Formula One needs that at the moment. We need these drivers to come in and you know, put it all on the line straight away as soon as they can. And you know, Max, okay, he's had 5 years in Formula One, but he's maturing every season, isn't he? I mean, you know, every time he gets in that car, every time he makes an error, I do feel like, more recently anyway, he's learning from it. Obviously, there have been times in the past where he's made errors and, you know, he's been very hasty on track, and he knows he's got a very good car and he's just pushed too far, and he's maybe not learned from those mistakes. But I think, you know, he's getting to a point now where he's starting to realise that he's got the backing of Red Bull, you know, and he's got a great engineer, personal engineer, who understands how to keep him grounded when he's, you know, losing his head a little bit in the car. I just think, like you say, everything's piecing together for Max nicely. It's just whether or not Red Bull can give him the tools to, you know, mount the challenge. As for Charles, you know, he was very impressive at Alfa Romeo. He's been very impressive in his junior career. You know, he won a championship in his first F2 season. So as a rookie to win an F2 championship, the sort of names that we're talking about that have achieved that kind of caliber are, yes, you know, George Russell, but you know, we're looking at more the likes of Rosberg, Hamilton, you know, very dominant names in the sport. So he's got a bright future ahead of him. The Ferrari guys back him heavily. I'm really excited for what these two have got to sort of offer going forward. You know, not just racing either. Both their personalities come through in the media, and that's something as fans we love to see as well. You know, we love to see great racing, but it's also nice to see a personality out of the car.
I think I was just going to say, I completely agree in terms of, they obviously, Max has ignited a country in terms of her fan base, in terms of the Orange Army, and Charles has just, even more so in this kind of break from racing as well, has become more popular off track. You know, a lot of people were emotionally attached to him with obviously the tragedy that he's had to go through his life to date. You know, with things going on, I think they're both really popular guys with a swelling fan base beneath them, which is great for the sport. I completely agree.
And that win at Monza as well for Charles really made Ferrari and Ferrari fans take him in and put him at the heart of Ferrari. And to be honest, I think that going into, you know, the sort of the middle of last season, I think Vettel would have still been their main option to sort of, you know, keep, especially until the new regulations come in. But I think what Charles showed towards, you know, the middle and the back end of last season, as he sort of really become at one with the car really showed its great, you know, straight line speed at tracks like Monza and Spa, and you know, there's a few tracks that he really shone at. But I think that his performance towards the back end of last season was really exciting, and I just can't see how. I mean, if he never wins the championship, I think it's more going to be down to the car than him, because he's without a doubt a special talent, and so is Max. But my point really is that Charles has had a lot less time. You know, Max has had a lot of backing. He's had a lot of time to make mistakes, a lot more time than a lot of drivers have been given. You know, a lot of drivers have been in and out of the sport, especially through Red Bull. You know, you look at the likes of Hartley, and I'm sure there are others. You know, obviously off the top of my head, I'm just thinking Hartley, he's, you know, come in, didn't really suit Formula One, and he didn't have the chance to adapt. But Max, they backed him heavily from the start, and they've given him what he needs to succeed. So Charles hasn't had that. Charles has sort of come in through Alfa Romeo, obviously come up from Formula 2, and yes, he was backed by, you know, the Ferrari Academy, but what he's shown in this short time so far is nothing short of phenomenal. And his like you say, the tragedy and stuff he's gone through off track, and how he's held his head, the way he held things together on the weekend of Antoine Hubert's death. He held things together on the weekend of his own father's death as well, I believe. So he's got a very strong mental resolve, and that's what makes a champion, I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that one. And I think they both do. They've both gone through different paths, which is interesting because Max was thrown into the spotlight very early, getting that Toro Rosso seat so young. And he had to do all his learning to where he is today in the spotlight. Every kind of move was scrutinised. Every mistake was kind of scrutinised because you're in the spotlight of F1. So he was this young protege and a load of pressure, and I think how he's handled that shows a lot of mental resolve as well, and he's definitely matured in the last couple of years especially. And Charles, he's done all that learning, he's very clever, but he, even through the feeder series, he zoomed through it because he won GP3 in his first year, he won F2 in his first year as well. Both have shown that they're pretty special talents, and I honestly think it's a flip of the coin between them because it just depends on which team produces the better car. I think really to split between them. I think they've both got the potential to win a championship, and like we said at the start of discussing them, they're the two clear favourites to be the next Formula One world champion. So going into the next guys, do we want to go for another young talent, or do we want to go for a couple of curveballs who are well placed at the moment but not really fancied?
Well, I think it's worth touching on Valtteri, isn't it? Because he's in a position this year where a lot of fans, myself included, really think that this is this year or not at all. And I really do think that with everything that's gone on prior to the season, and I know this is veering off a little bit, but all the coronavirus stuff and the delays that's caused, the only team I can see being really, really dominant is Mercedes coming out of this. Because if you think about this in racing and development terms, they're going to have to come to the first race weekend with just the best package they could produce at testing. Basically, that's going to be the sort of the main crux of it. Because they don't know the cars as well as they would probably want to by this point in the year, and if the calendar's going to be shorter, then every race counts. So I really do think Mercedes are going to throw everything at Lewis for his 7th title, but Valtteri's going to have a pretty much even car. Hamilton's been going through a lot of unrest away from the sport. Obviously he's been heavily involved with some political matters with the Black Lives Matter stuff, and I don't want to get into that. Obviously, I want to talk racing, and I fully support him in all of that. But I do think that his head is sort of elsewhere at the minute. So if Valtteri is going to win a world title, it has to be this year, because Charles and Max and the other younger guys are quickly approaching. Lewis is probably under more pressure than he has been because of that. He really wants to get that Michael Schumacher record beaten, I suppose, and he's a winning personality, Lewis is. So I can see him wanting to beat it, and I just think every championship he wins has mounted more pressure on him. So I think Valtteri's in a good position now to sort of mount a challenge. I read an article from Mika Hakkinen sort of saying that this is the best Valtteri's ever been. He's in the prime of his career and all this, that, and the other. And I'm not going to read too much into that. Mika Hakkinen was a great driver, and I respect his opinion very much. But I think it all comes down to how much Valtteri wants it, and whether he has got that ability. We know he's a good driver. He showed he was a good driver from the start. He showed he was a good driver when he was at Williams, but has he got it in the bag to be consistent week in, week out, or race in, race out? I don't know. But a part of me wants to see him win a title because of, he nearly lost his marriage to Formula One and a couple of other things. He's had a lot going on outside of the sport, as have a lot of drivers. But I just don't know if he's got it in the tank. What do you think?
I think Valtteri's an interesting one, and Valtteri, for me, this has to be his year. I think this is last chance saloon, which makes him, I think, a dangerous threat and a dangerous underdog here because, the murmurs going on, it feels like it's more than just paper talk of with classic transfers. It feels more so that it feels like a bit of momentum behind him, like obviously the Seb to leave Ferrari rumours. Obviously, Mercedes will be looking at Red Bull. They've got Max Verstappen well established. They'll also be looking at Ferrari with Charles Leclerc now established with that kind of long contract to kind of lead the team forwards. They've got to be looking who's our next young talent who's going to be driving the team forward. Do they want to... Valtteri Bottas is probably in the position that Daniel Ricciardo was at Red Bull. And he's like, do we want to put all our eggs behind Valtteri against these top talents? Do we think we trust him to win the championship, or do we want to go George Russell? So it kind of feels like this will be Valtteri's chance. And even if he has a good season, I feel he may still make way for George Russell. So he may not ever get another championship winning car. And like you said, everything around it, everything that's gone on before at the back end of last season, with obviously his marriage breaking down and things, you don't know whether that was just with his commitment to Formula One or it was other things. It certainly surely would have played a factor in things. But this is what these drivers live for. They don't get into F1 to be a number 2 driver and win constructors. That's not what they start the sport to. They do it to win the top prize, the driver's world title. And yeah, I think Valtteri, this is his best chance if ever he's going to win a world title. And I think he does really want it. It's just whether he believes in himself that he can beat Lewis. And I think that's always been the mental block with him.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. You've got to remember, for any driver teaming up with Lewis Hamilton, no matter what people have got to say about Lewis, he is the greatest driver of this generation. There's no question about that. People like to make comparisons to him to Senna and Prost and many greats, but in my opinion, you can't really compare eras. He's the best of this era, and that's that. And that's got to be intimidating for Valtteri or anybody else, even for George Russell, who will, potentially future partner him. It's an intimidating thing coming into a team with a man like him because, how many times have we heard Lewis on the radio still wanting more, still pushing for more, still getting angry about decisions and questioning strategy? No matter how many times that guy wins, no matter how many titles he wins, he is still hungry. And that is a dangerous animal in a Formula One car. So I feel like Valtteri, this season has to be his year. Toto is very, very subtly making suggestions that he's not going to be, holding on to Bottas much longer. I think he's sort of trying to usher him towards the Renault move from what I've been reading. Whether or not Valtteri will want to do that because, obviously I don't want to read too much into the whole marriage thing with him, but if it was Formula One related and he wants to, save his family life at home and all of that, he may just say, you know what, if I'm not in a top seat, I haven't achieved what I wanted to achieve, I'm going to walk away and I'm going to do something else. Maybe Formula E, which would be, slightly less unforgiving on his personal life, maybe a bit of rally. I know he likes to do rally in his spare time. There's a lot of options for Valtteri, and I'm not saying that he will definitely leave Formula One if he doesn't get renewed at Mercedes. I'm just saying it will be interesting to see what happens if he doesn't win that title this year.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's just the perfect place to leave Bottas because it just hangs in a balance. It feels like a very pivotal moment in his career in terms of which direction it makes sense. It's kind of at this time that Nico Rosberg made his serious push, obviously to win the title and went all in and gave absolutely everything to win in 2016. And, it will be interesting to see how this one pans out with Bottas. And I think we'll stay on the Mercedes thing and just kind of round off with them. We've mentioned him a couple of times already in this podcast, and that is George Russell himself. And there's stuck in a Williams seat, and unfortunately that Williams seat is a real burden at the moment. It's somewhere where he can kind of perform without any real pressure because everyone expects them to be at the back, and what he did qualifying and race-wise against Robert Kubica was still incredibly impressive last year, whatever way you look at it for a rookie season. But he can't sit around in a team like Williams forever. And yeah, he certainly feels to me like he's a guy who has the talent of a Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc potentially.
Yeah, I mean, he's of the same class without a doubt. You know, he's come up through the ranks with some really, really hot shots. And you know he's beaten them as well. So it's worth looking at his Formula 2 season and looking at the lots of the drivers that he didn't just win the world title in Formula 2. He absolutely ran away with it. I think it was an 86 point advantage or either 82 or 86 points he ran away with that by. And you know that's a fair distance. You know he was in a class of his own, and that was all basically him. You know, the machinery was good, but it was all him. He had some bad luck early on in his career. He's overcome some diversity at Formula 3 in Formula 3. I think he's without a doubt, you know, very level-headed guy, very, very strong driver indeed, you know. And you can see that as well from the lap times he's putting in testing when he is in the Mercedes. You can see that he is worthy of that car. But I think, you know, Mercedes have got to ask themselves a question. If they really are going to invest themselves into the future of Formula 1 and they are going to stay in Formula 1, then George Russell is the only option there, isn't he? And if he gets into that seat, surely, you know, I can see him finishing second or third in the World Championship in his first season at Mercedes, and then making a push for the title in his second season. It all really hangs on what happens with Mercedes. You know, we've got the Aston Martin situation, Toto Wolff situation. You know, there's a lot of cogs in the wheel, isn't there? And I think that, you know, if the cogs keep turning as they are now, Mercedes stay in the sport and they stay dominant, and George Russell gets in that car, I think he won't struggle at all. I think he will, you know, bring a world championship home. But for me, that all depends on what Mercedes do. It's not just about George, you know, and what happens if Mercedes say, okay, we're not going to commit our long-term future. Does George look at other options, and are those options something that aren't, you know, a title-winning car? So there's all those things to consider, but on raw talent and ability, George has without a doubt got the ability to win a world championship.
Yeah, I'd completely agree there, and it's the seat that's the real issue for George Russell. What makes Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc the favourites, like we said at the start, is they're in established teams that you know are going to be competitive, because Ferrari are always there or thereabouts, and you know they're always going to invest and stay in the sport. Red Bull, you know, they've got a really good team going. They've proven that they can be successful, and they've proven they can be dominant in the sport, and they still have a lot of good guys within that team and everything behind Max. George at the moment is, will Mercedes stay? It looks like they will stay. If you listen to Daimler coming out, they were pretty assertive by the fact that these rumours are just that, exactly, rumours. But also a team that dominates for so long, it always has to come to an end. And although we see like Mercedes, it doesn't look like it will come to an end, but there will be an end to this. The teams will get on top, and whether that's in the next couple of seasons in 2020 or 2021, or whether it's in the new rule change in 2022, we don't know. But George needs to get in a competitive seat, I think, as soon as possible, because you can soon become a forgotten talent, and he certainly has the ability to challenge Max and Charles on track, but you become a forgotten talent if you dwell in a team that isn't competitive for too long. And, you know, seats, it's all a bit of a political game in F1 of where the openings go and taking the right opportunity at the right time, and that's the difficult path that I think, the most difficult path he's got to navigate at the moment.
Yeah, sure. And, you know, going back to the dominance thing, we don't know how teams are going to handle the new financial, because, yeah, okay, there are new regulations coming in, but the financial thing is going to be the biggest thing to impact Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari, because they're so far over what the new regulations are looking to be spending. You know, the caps are, is it 173 million? I think it is.
I think it's no. I think it's even less than that. Obviously, the initially proposed one was 175, but I think with obviously everything that's gone on, I think it's 150, and over 3 years, I think it's working its way down to 135. So it's a massive cut in things.
Yes. So Mercedes last year spent 480 million. Ferrari spent 452. Red Bull are probably around the 370, 380 region. So all of them are more than half in what they're spending, and we've got to ask ourselves. The other thing is we've got the new aerodynamic rule coming in, which is obviously going to affect wind tunnel time for all of those teams, and that's going to have a crucial impact on their development as well. So I think when the regulations change, that will be when we see a changing of the guards in terms of who's dominant. I really do think that there's going to be some changes. I think that McLaren. I might sound biased here as a McLaren fan, but I do think McLaren are moving in the right direction, and I have faith in them to produce something under the new regulations. But George has to get into a seat that is going to thrive in those new regulations, because those new regulations is about when he's going to hit his peak. That's the bottom line of it, really, and it leads us nicely really into Carlos Sainz as well, because he's a character that could have easily gone under the radar, a driver that without a doubt has the ability to challenge if he's put in the right car. And the opportunity nearly went by him. He had a tough time with the Red Bull Academy stuff, and then got into Renault and lost his seat, and then finally found a home at McLaren and hit his stride last season. And for me now, he's a competitor just as much as George Russell is for me. And he's in a similar situation where he's a person that needs to get into a seat, to get into a seat that would validate his chances, and he's done that now. So maybe we need to look at Carlos.
Yeah, I was going to group Carlos and Alexander Albon together in terms of where they're situated, and obviously Carlos in the Ferrari seat and Alexander Albon in the Red Bull seat. On the face value of it, they're both against teammates who you would expect to kind of have the team favour them and go over, but also they're in an environment that teams that prove that they are competitive, and if everything falls together, they've got a really good chance of winning a championship. And Carlos Sainz, like you said, he's kind of been through a rocky path through F1, and this fantastic opportunity at Ferrari has really turned up for him. And a lot of people I think are probably expecting him to go in and play second fiddle to Charles, but just by the looks of Carlos and the way he speaks and how he kind of goes away his business, he's there to kind of get a sniff of a world championship. He's not there to play second fiddle. He may obviously, respect the team in certain situations, but he's certainly not going to lie down, and he certainly will feel that this is his opportunity to grab a shot at winning something that very few drivers have done, which is winning a Formula One world title.
Yeah. The thing with Carlos is you only have to look at his, he's had a lot of good performances, but you only have to look at that performance he had in Brazil, last season to know that he's got something special. He really has, and I think he made 12 on-track overtakes in that race, and I'm gutted. I'm actually gutted that Carlos has left McLaren, but to see him go to Ferrari, a Spaniard whose hero was Alonso as a child, you can't deny him that opportunity, and I'm really, really excited to see what he can produce. And going back to the first, second driver, he's come out and said he's not a second driver. Nowhere on my contract does it say I'm a second driver. But the other thing to consider is the fact that a lot of teams like Red Bull and Ferrari, because they are so determined to beat Mercedes, they have to give both drivers a more than reasonable car. So they may favour Max or Charles, depending on which one you're talking about, but they've still got to give a car to Carlos and Alex that are capable of pulling in constructors' points, because at the end of the day, to Red Bull and Ferrari, the Constructors' Championship's the one that means something. So I think it's going to be interesting to see Carlos in that machinery. It's going to be good to see what Alex can produce when he's, not got the unsettlement of moving teams in the middle of the season. He's had a little bit of time to settle down at Red Bull. He started to understand how Christian Horner likes things done, and who knows? We could even see them, outshining Max and Charles this season. It really is all up in the air, but that's exciting. We've been looking for some excitement in Formula One for a little while now because things have been tailing off. Some of the regulations have made things a little bit, I don't want to say boring, but I do want to say that races aren't what they used to be in some places, especially at some tracks. So we need this kind of excitement from these young guys coming through, pressuring people. So it's good to see them in the hot seat. It's good to see the likes of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz making teams like Ferrari and Red Bull. But between Red Bull and Ferrari, they haven't got a driver over 25. So make of that what you will, but they are the future of the Formula One grid.
Absolutely, I think that's a fantastic point. That investing in the youth, and it looks in a good place, and it's exciting to see, what these guys do and can upset the kind of established apple cart. Obviously, we've had, the 2010s were dominated by Lewis and Sebastian. The 2020s may be dominated by one or two drivers, or it may be a kind of decade of multiple world champions. We don't know, but there's certainly the talent there to kind of have a mix up, and that's exciting. And I think, with Alexander Albon, that's the interesting bit for me. And to date, he hasn't shown anything that I go, definitely he's going to challenge. But I think you look at his career all the way through karting and the adversity that he's had to come through, the difficult thing obviously with his family and his mum being in prison for a while. That must have been incredibly tough to handle and still perform and still get there. He wasn't expected to be in Formula One at the start of the 2019 season, and by the end of it he was in one of the top 6 seats within Formula One. So it's incredible how this opportunity's worked out for him, and you just can't rule him out to just continue to adapt. I think he shows that he's a very adaptable driver, and when an opportunity comes his way, he seems to grasp it.
Yeah, and the other thing as well, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, could it? I mean, he seems like such a genuine fellow, and he seems like his heart's completely in the right place. Not just with racing, but in his own personal life. And I hope that he does good things because like you say, he's overcome the adversity. He's representing his country well in the sport, or his country of origin well in the sport. Like you say, we haven't seen enough of him to say, okay, he's a definite title contender, but we haven't seen enough of him to say that he's not. He was very close to a podium in Brazil. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton gave him a cheeky tap and made him wait a little bit longer. But until we've seen half of this season, I don't think we can make a fair judgment of Alex, because he could progress at a rate of knots and all of a sudden be one of the best drivers on the grid. Because he's that kind of guy where when he puts his head down and he switches on. I've seen him in races where the first half of the race has just been awful for him, and then something's just switched inside of him, and all of a sudden he's making up positions like crazy. I think was it Belgium last year potentially? I think he came from 18th to finishing 6th. So he's got the ability, and now he's in the car. We'll see what he's made of. Whether or not he's going to be the next world champion, I think that would be a little bit far fetched. But one day I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, I completely agree in terms of he just seems such a genuine and nice person. Like, he interviews so well, and there's almost a little bit of a kind of a timidness about him in interviews that you go against the big personalities of Charles and Max and George even, who are very self-assured of themselves. How will he stand up within that? But yeah, I think that Belgian performance was a brilliant one to highlight. The way that he went through, I think it was just the manner of the way that he drove. The actual performance itself, getting a Red Bull, the pressure was off because obviously he he had to have the upgrades on the car, which gave him the grid penalties that started him back there. But I think a move on Ricciardo going around the outside on the, I can't remember what corner, but it was the kind of loop there. But that was a fantastic overtake, and I think that really, set the tone of how he's going to go about his business in Red Bull. He's not going to die wondering, if that makes sense.
He showed balls in that performance as well, if we're being honest. I mean, the final overtake, I think it was his last overtake of the race, going around Sergio Perez, and he just clipped the grass, which shows a level of confidence for a guy that's just got into the Red Bull car. Shows a level of confidence that's quite impressive as well. Self-confidence and self-belief, because you lose a lot of grip. You come off the tarmac, you do lose a lot of grip, especially at high speed. So he backed himself to, make that overtake, touch the grass, and he still got it done. So obviously these are very minute details of his career, and by the end of his career, we probably won't even remember those overtakes. It'll be, much more dramatic moments that we remember of him. But things like that, they show that, he's not scared to make the move. And that's what's so exciting about this generation that we've got now. Charles, Max, Carlos, George, Alex, Lando, these are all names, and there are other names on the grid, but these are guys that are willing to take the risk to win races and to make up positions, and that's what makes for exciting racing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it just kind of, I think, sets the tone for the next generation, that they don't appear to kind of be scared of, putting their car on the line. They want to throw everything behind for a win. That's also because they're young, and so they haven't got the wiliness of kind of Lewis yet, who does what he needs to kind of, he's almost got that Prost-esque ability about him, that he does what he needs to do to accumulate the points that wins him races and championships, and he gets the job done. Where, we've got these young, fresh, exciting guys, because Lewis was much like it. In his early years in the sport, it kind of really sets a really good precedent for things. But that rounds off the kind of top three teams, and they're the obvious cases. But say, Lewis Hamilton does win this season, does win next season, then obviously we're still in search of, a new Formula One world champion, or, a first-time world champion. I think it then brings into account McLaren and Aston Martin, I think, are the two teams who are best positioned. And then in that case, outside shots, and these are probably the last three kind of outside shots you can talk about, which would be Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, and Sergio Perez. And it would be a massive outside shot. Obviously, Sergio Perez is probably at the bottom of that list, because so much has to work in that Aston Martin team. But McLaren, certainly, you mentioned it earlier, it obviously being your team and exciting with the team going forward. They've got an incredibly talented driver lineup now, and if they continue to improve at the rate they did in 2019, you can't rule them out, can you?
No, and I mean, you've only got to look at where McLaren were a few seasons ago, and they were in a very similar situation to Williams in terms of racing. They were just not making good race cars. And it was showing. There was a lot of pressure in the team. I don't think Alonso was a good fit at the time. He was, very critical, and they've seemed to have got rid of that toxic environment and created something nice. And that's sort of why I'm a little bit, disappointed. Not disappointed, because I'm happy for Carlos, but there's a level of upset there that Carlos is leaving, because he's part of that new dynamic. He's part of that new mission, the fearlessly forward mission that McLaren have embarked on. But by the time 2022 comes around, like you say, if we can progress at that rate from now till then, could be very strong contenders. And Daniel Ricciardo has shown himself to be a very, very formidable driver indeed. He's the sort of guy that I can definitely see being a world champion. For me, he reminds me of James Hunt. In that, doesn't really care what people think. I say what I want to say, do what I want to do. It's kind of, and his driving style as well is a little bit ruthless, a little bit aggressive at times. He very much likes to, show people up when he passes them. He doesn't always like just making the obvious move. He likes to go around the outside and do special things. And, you know, he's a special driver. And I think that if he'd have stayed at Red Bull, he probably could be closer to achieving that you know, world title. But obviously Max sort of got in the way of things there. He made the wrong decision to go to Renault, and even at the time I said it was the wrong decision for him to go to Renault, because they
just never were going to produce the package, and I really don't think that they will produce a package worth competing by 2022 either. I just don't think they've got the dynamic right over there. So he's made the right decision to move away. I hope that McLaren can offer him something that, you know, puts him up there. Whether or not I can see him, you know, beating the likes of Charles and Max when they're, I don't know, but it's definitely worth thinking about. And like you said, a very outside shots. I can't see Lando personally. I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but I haven't seen a lot from Lando that makes me think, okay, he's a world title contender. He's a good driver, without a doubt. You know, he's got a great personality. The ladies love him. You know, he's marketable, but I don't know if you agree with me here, but I'm not really sure what he's shown to, you know, sort of be in the mix for a potential world title, apart from his, you know, junior career performances, okay, but we're in Formula One now, and, you know, I think Carlos outperformed him. You know, if you take away, like, let's not look at it on paper, let's look at what happened on track. You know, I think Carlos was the better driver at McLaren last year.
I would say with Lando Norris, that's he's a very interesting one for me. I think, look, by beating Carlos in qualifying, it shows he's got pace. And first and foremost, you need to be a quick driver to be able to compete and win world titles. In his rookie season, I thought he did a solid job in terms of it. My biggest fear on Lando is, I think, in the right environment, in the right situation, he certainly has the ability to at least challenge for a world title in that situation. But for me, it's his mentality. I think he lets people's criticism get to him too much. I think he lets what people think of him get to him too much. And that's just a small chink in the armour. You look at the Charles, you look at the Maxes. You know, if someone was criticising the way Max was off track, do you think he would care? He would just kind of brush it off and he'd go, I know what I'm doing. You know I'm a good racing driver and I know what I need to do to perform. Where Lando, you know, the things he was doing, interviews before in kind of pre-season testing, he was talking about how he was going to change how he was going to be slightly this season because he wants to be taken more seriously. Like, he just needs to go, screw what everybody else thinks, almost. I know I'm a talented driver. If I just do what I need to do to be in the best environment for me, I've got a real shot in a team like McLaren here. And it was a very solid rookie season. But for me, what holds him back in this debate would be his mentality at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't for a minute saying he didn't have the capability. He's a very, very strong driver. Yeah, but yeah, he did have a strong rookie season. He did, but you know, if I look at him, I like to compare him to Albon because, you know, they were in the same Formula 2 category together. They raced with George Russell, and they were the three, you know, top guys in that season. But obviously, it's a difficult one because Albon has been given an opportunity in a top seat halfway through the season, so it's difficult to compare him. But all I'd say is that Albon seems to be a lot more level-headed, so it does sort of go back to the mentality thing that you were talking about. You know, Albon's head seems to be on his shoulders, and Lando still seems to have this almost schoolboy being told off by his mum or dad type persona about him. Like, he's up to mischief. You know, I like Lando. I like Lando a lot. I think he's a great character. I like his stylish helmet designs. You know, his driving style is good. Some of his onboard microphone messages back to his engineer make me laugh. You know, I enjoy having him in Formula One, and I hope that he does produce something. But I'm just not sure that he's shown me anything at the moment to say, okay, he's a future title contender.
Yeah, I think he certainly is in that category. I think how you described Albon is probably the perfect way to describe Lando. He hasn't shown enough to suggest that he could win a future world title, but we certainly haven't seen enough for him to rule him out of that. And there are just glimpses what he's done on track. He was a bit unlucky with the reliability in certain positions. Was it Spa actually itself where he retired from P5, wasn't he? It was a really difficult end for him to stomach that race. But some of the wheel-to-wheel action with the McLarens at the start of the race, it'd been pretty impressive overtakes that he's done. So it's just kind of head screw on and knuckle down for him. If he can sort that mentality, probably not the next new F1 world champion, but you certainly wouldn't rule out the ability in the future on him.
No, and he's, for a positive on Lando, because I don't want people to think that I'm sort of hating on him. His spatial awareness in the car is really good as well. He definitely knows his way around his car, and he knows when a gap's there and when it isn't. And he's got that tactical thing about him. He knows when to look after his tyres, when to get out of the dirty air and that kind of thing. And they're all things that, some drivers don't develop until they've had a little bit more time in Formula One than he has. So, he's on the right track. He's on the right path. And it's just whether or not all the pieces come together as he matures as a person and a driver. But we'll see. I'm excited to see what his future holds either way.
Yeah, he is part of that exciting generation where you go, what are you going to do? What's your career going to look like in 5 years' time? What are we going to be talking about with Lando Norris? Are we going to be talking about he's a serious talent in the sport, or does he go the way of maybe someone like a Nico Hülkenberg, who clearly has pace, clearly has top ability, but never is a way of finding to capitalise on that talent, shall we say, and so to speak?
I was just going to say, the thing is as well, is the young drivers aren't going to stop coming through. There are a couple that are in with a shout within the next couple of years of getting into the sport, and pressure comes with it, no doubt. But the likes of Robert Schwartzman, he's shown he's a very talented guy. And I'm not saying that these guys are going to come straight into the sport and win a world title in their rookie season, because it's all very dependent on what seat they get. But what I would say is that, if Hamilton does dominate, like we said earlier, for 21 this season and 21, and then we come into 22, new regulations, shake up on the grid, who knows who the dominant team are going to be, and who knows who are going to be in those seats. So the likes of Robert Schwartzman, Mick Schumacher, he's under a lot of pressure. He's very much under the microscope, but if he can produce what he needs to produce this season, he's in for a shout with a seat at Alfa Romeo, and I'm sure Ferrari would eventually love to have another Schumacher in their car if he's got the ability. And I'm not for a minute saying that he's 100% a Ferrari driver in the future, because he's still got a lot of proving himself to do. But there's a long list of drivers that are going to come through and add to the excitement, and it won't be long before the likes of Charles and Max are the maturer names in the sport.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that is a really big thing. That there is a lot of exciting young talent in the feeder series. I know from obviously you looking at it, and we obviously look at it on the channel as well. There's a whole host of talent in F2, but also in F3 as well already. And then we don't know who are the kind of stars of tomorrow in other categories as well, who we haven't quite seen. It does rapidly change, and like you said, with the rule changes coming in, we don't know who the dominant team will be. But the last driver we'll focus on, because he's a real curveball. And whether he has the ability, but he's a guy that's got a lot of experience in F1. He's shown to be an incredibly top performer in the midfield. Just for an example, when, last season, he always grabs a podium when there's an opportunity, does Sergio Perez. He's been the most successful midfielder in the 2010s. He also is a guy that at the back end of last year, when Racing Point finally got back on their feet with the Lawrence Stroll investment and they were starting to bring the upgrades and building a good car, he was the highest scoring driver in the midfield, even more than, Carlos, who had a good season, Ricciardo, all the guys of the teams who finished above him, he outscored all of them in that second part of the season. That Racing Point now going to be Aston Martin. It looked good in pre-season testing, and with the Aston Martin branding and link with Lawrence Stroll's investment, they could easily be a team that at the top and could easily see Sergio Perez with a shot at a world title.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. The thing is with Perez is he's like the Max of Mexico, isn't he? He's got a very big fan base, and he's shown, on a number of occasions that he's got the ability to win races. If he was in the right car, he could potentially win races. But I think my main concern for Perez is that he has said he's getting a little bit bored of being in the middle of the grid or at the back towards the back of the grid, and I can't blame him. There was talk of retirement. Not, I think, was it last season? It was just whispers that he was starting to feel a little bit unhappy in the sport, and he didn't like the fact he was always a back marker, always sat at the back, or the car wasn't as reliable as his ability is, and a couple of other things. But the other thing to think about as well is, okay, Aston Martin have said, okay, next season Sergio and Lance are going to be their partnership. But what happens if, Aston Martin decide they want to sign a big name? What happens if Lewis wins his world titles and says, okay, I'm going to wrap up my season over at Aston with Toto, and somebody at Aston Martin has to lose their seat? I think it would be Perez, because, Stroll's son's in the seat, and he's always going to prioritise his son, isn't he? So I think it depends if he keeps a seat, to be honest. He's without a doubt got the ability. I completely agree with everything you've said, and he's shown a real turn of pace at times. And the other thing is as well, who knows? I mean, they apparently copied the Mercedes this season. People are calling it the pink Mercedes and whatnot. But, this season's car is hopefully one that's going to perform. And maybe then we can really see what Perez is all about. And we can see who the stronger driver is out of Lance Stroll and Perez. If that car's as fast as it was in pre-season testing, and obviously pre-season testing has never been a telling period of the season. It's never been something that's we can concrete rely on for evidence of how the season's going to go. But what I would say is that let's see how this season goes. If that car is as quick as the Mercedes was last season, which I'm not saying it will be, but they're calling it the pink Mercedes, so let's dream for a minute. We'll see what Sergio Perez is really capable of, and we'll see, how hungry he is, and then maybe we can make a decision. But at this point, he's an outside shot, and he is a curveball, but he's a driver with ability and stacks of it. So I would never say never.
Yeah, he's certainly, out of everyone we've discussed today, he feels like one of those generation of drivers that are kind of forgotten. It's never fallen into the right seat at the right time. I think the only thing that benefits him, going back to your point about who would lose his seat between him and Lance, is he's also kept that team afloat because he brings in absolutely huge investment. I mean, people talk about Lance being a paid driver. Sergio Perez, very much to an extent, you could argue, is a paid driver as well for what he brings. And Lawrence he's a billionaire, yeah, and you don't make a shed ton of money by making emotional or sentimental decisions. He certainly will give Lance the benefit of the doubt and give him extra leniency, but he's also heavily invested in Aston Martin. He's heavily invested in the Racing Point team. If he's seriously going to go to, and he's head of a consortium, how could he walk in with any sort of, legitimacy or authority in that boardroom and go, I think we should drop Lance Stroll over Sergio, drop Sergio over Lance, even though Sergio is clearly the better driver? He would lose all respect within that team, and it would certainly cause him a lot more problems, and he'd essentially be funneling money down a drain, which he has done a little bit to Lance's, but I think even he has an extent of, there's only so much money I can invest in Lance before we give up on this dream of being a top F1 driver.
Yeah, I mean, Lance is, He's a good driver. I think he gets a lot. He gets a lot of slack, Lance, and it's probably because he's a paid driver and his daddy's a billionaire, and he's paid his way into the sport. He does get a lot of slack, but I've seen things in Lance that if he was in the right car, potentially we could see a different driver. And it all just depends on how good Aston are, really, doesn't it? I mean, I'd really like to see Racing Point be very fast this year. I'd like to see that pink Mercedes be quick, so we can get a real gauge on which one of those two guys is the better driver. Now, at the minute, I would 100% say Sergio Perez is the better driver, and I wouldn't even second guess that opinion. But what I am saying is that Lance has shown in his junior career and in his time in F1 that he's got the ability to drive. So the thing with Racing Point is they've just been very hit and miss. Some weekends they've been fantastic, some weekends they just haven't. They've been off the pace. So I'd really like to see that so-called pink Mercedes show up this season and give us something to talk about on the Racing Point front. And then when they become Aston Martin next season, that's going to be something for fans to get excited about. Is a new team with two drivers that have just shown that when they're in a pacey car they can contend. And then we'll see what the future holds for both of those guys. And Sergio Perez could be a future world champion if all of the stars align.
Yeah, and it almost feels like there has to be a certain element of those things falling into place. And like we said, a complete outside shot. But Aston Martin, I think, like you said, it is exciting. And obviously us both being from the UK, we know how much of a big brand Aston Martin is in here. Obviously, forever associated with James Bond as well. You could just see Racing Point for me at the moment doesn't really have too much of a big support behind it, but with a name like Aston Martin plastered over it, it could build a swell of support and suddenly a bit of fan momentum behind them, supporting them is that little thing that you feel can send them in the right direction. But I think this is probably a good point to round off, and it's been a fantastic chat, Joe. I think we've talked about potential future world champions and who might be the next first world champion. I'll ask you in a second a round off question, but we've also gone on a bit of detours as well. But I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had to choose out of any of the one names that we've selected today, who would you say will be the next new F1 world champion?
For me, Charles. For me, the reason I say Charles is just I really, really like his driving style. And this is taking away nothing from Max. This is a personal opinion. They both 100% have got the ability to do it, and I wouldn't be surprised if Max did it. But for me, Charles, he's got that psychological edge over Max, I think. So I can see Charles being the next world champion that isn't Lewis Hamilton.
That is interesting. You think he's got the psychological edge. Like I said, for me, it's a flip of a coin between those two. But I'm going to make it interesting. I personally think, with that extra experience within Formula One and that extra experience within his team, I think Max Verstappen does have the edge in this one when Lewis Hamilton finally decides to yield and stop winning championships, because at the moment he just doesn't look like stopping doing that, which is incredible for the feat, and like you said, for him to maintain Hungary and keep doing it, it is incredible to kind of see him keep going like he does.
Yeah, but to be honest, I think it's worth mentioning, I wouldn't rule Max out this year. We've got a double header in Austria. Max has been strong at Austria over the past couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised to see Max, competing towards the end of this European leg. We've got to remember this is going to be a shorter season. It's going to be a different season because we're going to have double headers rather than new tracks. Red Bull have in the past been very good at adapting to change. I really do think that Max. I think Max will be second, if not first, this season. I'm backing Lewis to win the title. I won't lie, but I'm just saying that Max could be a lot closer than people think, and I definitely think that Max will finish above Valtteri this season.
Very, very interesting indeed, and I think a good point to kind of end and leave kind of thought for people in the comments down below. But Joe, thank you so much for coming on. It's been brilliant kind of having you on the podcast. It's nice to kind of finally have a chat and get together. Obviously, it's been going for a couple of months now, and it's nice to kind of have a proper F1 chat.
Yeah, definitely, and thank you very much for having me. It's I'm just getting used to these sort of collaborations with some of these guys on YouTube, so it's nice because that's why I started doing the whole thing in the first place, was to be able to have these kind of chats with fellow fans of the sport. So yeah, thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
No problem at all, mate. It's been a brilliant chat. And like I said at the start of this video, if you are new to Joe's channel and you've come across us before you've come across Joe, please go and drop him a subscribe. I will leave a link to his channel and some of his videos in the description down below. Fantastic new kind of F1 YouTuber on the scene and produces some really great F1 content. And as you've heard in today's podcast, clearly very knowledgeable F1 fan and very interesting to listen to as well. So it's been brilliant having Joe on. And if you're new around here, guys, you can subscribe to the channel, click that bell notification, and you can keep up to date with all our latest content with the last of the F1 Worldwides before the season gets going, which, I don't know about you, Joe, but I am absolutely excited to see action back on track.
Yeah, it's been too long, hasn't it?
It absolutely has been. It feels so crazy how long it's been. But yeah, that's it from us today, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this. We've really enjoyed having this chat. And let us know in the comments below who you think will be the next new world champion in Formula One. And also, what do you make of the kind of discussion of whether there'll be world champions in the future, of some of the further discussions we've had within this. But guys, that's it from us. So for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.